Getting started with HTML and CSS Part 2. CSS Basics. Introduction. In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to CSS coding. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. This basically means that you can layer code on top of your HTML page. You can add CSS code to the top of your page within the head tag between two style tags. This will restrain your CSS code to the one page that you are working on. The more common approach to take with CSS coding is to make an external page with all of your CSS code and then link to that page within the header of your page. We did this in the last tutorial. We created a style sheet called style.css and we linked to it within the head tag. In this tutorial, we're going to take our website from looking like this, which is what we created in the last video, to looking like this, all by using CSS coding. Let's get started. Before we dive into CSS coding, let's discuss one other aspect of HTML coding that we didn't have a chance to discuss in the last video, and that is the use of meta tags. Meta tags are basically going to be a way that you can add information about your website, or about the page that you're working on, I should say, and embed that information inside of the code of the page. So that way web crawlers that scan your website can get information about what content is on the page, and that can help them to index the page with Google and other search engines. So to add a meta tag, you want to go into the head tags on your index HTML page. You want to type meta name equals, and I'm going to use keywords. You have a few different options for what kind of meta tags you use, but for now we're going to use keywords. Then we're going to type content equals, well, our index page is about comic books, so we can type comic books, comma, and maybe movies. And then we want to have an open and close quotation marks around our keywords. And then we want to have the greater than sign. Another meta tag we can use is going to be one for, let's do the author. Be careful, you want to put author and you also want to put keywords and quotation marks. Next we're going to have content equals computer aided in destruction. If you're wondering what computer aided in destruction means, it's just a play on words. You have computer aided instruction, which is basically using technology to help enhance the minds of your audience. And then you have computer aided destruction, which is using technology to inflict damage on others, which I do not advocate. I suppose I'll make some videos about maybe cyberbullying, about cybersecurity, maybe not so much about hacking. I'm not going to teach you how to hack, but I can probably make some videos about protecting your server, protecting your website, and things like that. But that's neither here nor there. So the first thing we want to do is go to our website and make some decisions about what we want to alter with the code. I want to add a background. I want to take this picture and center it on the page. I want to change the font for my headers and my paragraphs. And I think that's a good start. So let's work from there. The next thing we want to do is open up our index page. And let's look at the tags that we're using on the page and decide which ones we can alter. I don't really like to alter HTML, so I'm gonna ignore that. That's just not something that I do. If you alter the head tag with CSS code, it's not going to make a difference because basically nothing in the head tag is visible on the page. So body is a good place to start. H1 for the headers, P for the paragraphs. I'm going to leave the list alone, and then we'll look at table. Before we start writing out code for CSS, it's a good idea to understand the syntax, which is the way that the code is written. Now, we went through the index page and we looked at some of the different tags that were in use, such as body, H1, H2, and H3 for the headers, P for the paragraph, and table for, you guessed it, table. Well, those tags are called selectors. And then after you have your selector, you have to have a curly bracket, an opening and a closing. And in between is where you're going to put information to describe how you want the selector to be altered. So the first thing you are going to place is something called a property. So for instance, color is a property, so if you want to change the background color of the body of your website, you could type in background-color. If I just use color as a property, that's going to change things like the font color. It's not really going to work for body that well, I don't think. And then when you decide, well, what property you want to change, you have to decide in what way you want the property to change. So if you want the background color to change to blue, you could type in blue. It's going to be more common to use a hexadecimal code instead of just typing out a word for a color that you want to use, because our vocabulary for different shades of blue is going to be extremely limited compared to just using a code. But we'll talk about that in a moment. So this is basically the way that you're going to format your CSS code. You're going to have a selector. You don't want to capitalize H1, but so you're going to have a selector. You're going to decide what aspect of the selector you want changed, and then you're going to explain to what extent you want it changed or how you want it changed. Let's dive into CSS coding by doing something really simple. Let's just change the font on our page. If you're looking at our page on the left, everything is in Times New Roman font, so let's change it over to a sans serif font like Arial. And I want to change all of the fonts on the page, not just the paragraphs, but also the headers and everything in the list. So I'm going to use body as my selector, so that's going to be making universal changes to everything. My first property is going to be font-family, colon, I'm going to use Arial. And just in case, if for some reason your server doesn't have Arial in its library, you want to give it some different options for fonts. So I'll type in Verdana and maybe Open Sans. There's pretty much no chance your server's not going to have Arial. But if you were to ever buy like a novelty font from a store and you hosted it on one server, but then you transferred your website to a different server and you forgot to carry over your font, well, you want to give your website options, so that's why you want to list out maybe 2 or 3 different fonts to choose from. Otherwise, it's just going to default back to Times New Romans or whatever font is the default. Then I'm going to have my closing curly bracket. I'm going to save this, refresh the page. All of my fonts changed to Arial. Now, if I don't want every font to change, I just want my headers. Let me change it to heading 2. Let me save that, refresh my page. As you can see, these heading 2s changed, but the paragraphs are back to Times New Romans, and so is heading 1. So for now, I'm just going to use body. Save it, refresh, and we're good. Okay, let's continue talking about fonts. As you can see, I went ahead and added my selectors for H1, H2, H3, and paragraph. And then I have my curly brackets for each. Missing one here. So I have open and closing curly brackets. And what do I want to put in here? I want to change the size of my fonts. So let's use font size, font dash size, colon. I'll make this one 48 pixels, semicolon. And I'm not going to type that out every single time, so let me copy it, paste it, make this one maybe 42 pixels. We'll make this one maybe 36 pixels. And we'll make our paragraphs, let's make it 24 pixels. That's a little big, but let's just see what happens. File save, refresh my page, and all of the font is gigantic. Let me make the paragraphs just standard. I'll make it 14. That's a little bit better. Let's go ahead and add a background color, and then we'll add a background wallpaper. So first thing I want to do is go to my body tag, type in background dash color, and let's choose a color like, I don't know, pink. I'm thinking pink because we have a picture of the ocean at sunrise. You're going to see pinks and oranges and reds. So let's save this, refresh the page, and you see pink. Now you're probably thinking, well, there's so many different shades of pink that you could go for, so many different shades of blue and orange and whatnot, that just simply typing out the name of a color is not going to work. So what you want to do traditionally is use a hexadecimal code. So if you go to the website html-color.codes, it will give you a color chart, and you can use this slider to decide what color you want to use. Let's go for maybe like a sandy orange, and then we can go and fine-tune the color that we're selecting in the bottom square. And I think this one looks pretty good, so we'll grab this hexadecimal code. Hexadecimal codes are just letters and numbers that are arranged in such a way to indicate what shade of a particular color that you want to use. And you always have a hashtag in front of it. So instead of pink, let's get rid of that. Let's add this, file save, refresh our page, and that worked pretty well. Now if we want to have a wallpaper instead of a background color, let's type in background dash image colon. Your inclination is probably going to be to type in maybe images slash, let me open my website folder, go to images, let me get the name of my file, copying it, pasting it here, adding .jpeg, semicolon. Let's click save, and this is not going to work. This is not how you set an image using CSS. What you need to do is you need to type URL, open and close parentheses, and you need to have the file and its location and quotation marks. So let me click file save, and we have our wallpaper. One interesting thing about the wallpaper is that it's going to repeat unless I decide to add code saying don't repeat the wallpaper. Let's just have the image appear once and stop it. So I'm going to type in background dash repeat colon no dash repeat semicolon. Control S to save, refresh my page. And as you can see, the wallpaper stops once the full height of the image is reached, and then we result back to the background color, which was this sandy orange. So the next thing that we decided to do was to take our picture and center it on the page. So going to my style sheet, what I could do is just take the image tag that I had in my index page and add some coding here. But the problem with doing that is that every time I add an image, it's going to be affected by this code. So having this picture centered is okay, but if I have other pictures on the page, I might want them to be against the left-hand side of the screen or the right-hand side of the screen. So instead of using an image tag, I'm going to create a custom tag. I'm going to call it gallery. When you create a custom tag, you can give it any name that you want, But when you're using CSS, you have to do one of two things with your name. You have to put a period in front or a hashtag in front. If you put a period in front of the name, it's called a div tag, or should I say a div class. If you put a hashtag in front, it's called a span class. The difference is that with the div, you are going to affect a large area of the screen. So I could put an opening div tag here in front of home, the header, and then down below this list. And everything that I have in the code will affect everything on the page in between the two tags. With the span tag, all it's going to affect is one single horizontal row. So it's much more limited. So that's why I always just code with div tags. Then if I want to affect the location of something on the page, I'm going to add a margin. You can have margin left, margin right, margin top, and margin bottom. I'm only going to work with margin left and right. I'm going to give a margin left of 500 pixels and a margin to the right of 0 pixels. And you're probably wondering what this mean. Well, the margin to the left this is basically saying I want to push this image from the left-hand side of the screen 500 pixels to the right. I don't need to push it from the right-hand side of the screen since it's already pushed against the left-hand side, so pushing it more is going to be pointless. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to my index. I'm going to surround this picture with my div tags. Div class equals gallery. And I'm going to have my closing div tag. Like I said earlier, if I want to affect more than just the picture, I could put the closing div tag here or somewhere else on the screen. But I only want to affect the picture. So let's save it, refresh, and as you can see, the image has been pushed to the right 500 pixels. But one thing about the index page, let's get rid of this width of 300 pixels. Let's just keep that here. And this is not going to work, and let me explain why in a moment. Actually, let me save this as well. Refresh my page, and it didn't work. The picture is much larger than 300 pixels. Actually, before I do anything else to the code, I want to show you another way to add our tags in the index page, and it should work. So instead of surrounding the picture with the div tags, what you normally want to do is just type in class equals gallery somewhere in the image tag. So I have it right before the link to the image in the alt tag. So I'm going to click save, refresh, and that actually works better for images. Not 100% sure why, but that's just the way it is. So if you have an image, look for your image tag in CSS, then add your div class here by typing class equals the name of it, and then everything should be good. Now 500 pixels is not centered on the page, so the shortcut is to just type in auto for margin left and right, save and refresh, and that didn't work. So another catch is to type in display : block. So that turns this picture into like a block, and it's basically saying everything inside of the square or rectangle or whatever, everything that's going to be affected by this tag has to be formatted like a block, and that will center it on the page. So there's a lot you have to just figure out, and it's not just trial and error. You really have to just learn CSS to know these shortcuts, because we could have been sitting here for half an hour trying to figure out, okay, why didn't our image center on the page? Displaying it as a block is just something I know you have to do, especially when you use margin left and right as auto, and you're looking at a picture. You don't even necessarily have to do display block if I was just centering some text, but that's the way it is with pictures. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. Now, something else we can do with the picture is to add a border around it. Let's create a 1 pixel border. We need to make it solid. Let's give it a color of #6 That means it's going to be black. Refresh the page. That looks pretty good. Just make the border 10 pixels, refresh the page. It looks really big. Let's make it 2 and stay with that. Another thing that we can do is to make the edges of our picture rounded. So border radius colon, let's make it at 10 pixels, semicolon, refresh my page. That looks pretty nice. So there are a lot of different options you can use to format your picture with CSS. I normally curve my pictures and add any kind of effects like this with Photoshop, but if you want to do something quick and easy without using an art program, just do some exploration of what you can do with CSS and apply it. Now that we're looking at our page, you're probably wondering, well, since we have this background, this wallpaper, it's going to make the text hard to read, and we need to have good figure ground contrast when it comes to the text. So one option is to just add a background color to all of our paragraphs. So I could type in background color hashtag FFF 6 Fs. That's for white. Let's click save and see what happens. I mean, we could do something like this for all of the text, but that's not really practical. So a better solution is to just pick a region of the page that we want to have a white background, and let's put some div tags around that region. It's kind of like having pylon cones set up. So let's create a new region. Let's call it main. And let's set our background color to white. Now I need to go into my index page, and I need to decide where on the page do I want the opening div tag and where do I want the closing div tag. So let's have it right above home, and let's stop it right at this vertical line, this horizontal line I should say. So div class equals main, and I'll have my closing div tag. Let's have it beneath the table. Let's click File Save. Refresh the page. And as you can see, everything is now white. Let me expand the website. Now you're probably wondering, well, what's the point of having a wallpaper if we're just going to cover it up? Well, that's a good question. Well, something we can do is push this down, push this main section down, so we can see more of the wallpaper at the top, and we can also push it in so we can see the wallpaper on the left and right hand side of the page. We can do that by using the margin tags. So let's go back to main. Let's give it a top margin. Let's give it like 50 pixels and see what happens. And let's give it a margin to the left. Let's give it maybe 200 pixels. The margin on the right of 200 pixels. Save it, refresh. And that's a little, okay, it looks good. I guess it looks pretty good when we're using a full screen, but if we have a really narrow screen, it doesn't look that good because the main text area is really narrow. So instead of using pixels, we can use a percentage for the left and right side. So let's use 20%. And let's see what that looks like. It doesn't look significantly different. It looks a lot different when the screen is wider. So let's try just something like 10%. Let's click refresh. Okay, that looks pretty good. We'll just keep it at 10%. Or maybe we can just do 5. %, 10%, I'll let you decide what you want to use, but this allows us to see a little bit of the wallpaper to the top of the page, at the top of the page, and on each side. I'm going to stick with 10%. Okay, let's add some code to alter the appearance of the table. One thing I want to go ahead and do first is go to my index page, look up the tables, and remove the width that I added here. And I'll remove the border as well. I'll save it. And our tables look really barren, so we can make the changes that we want in our style.css page. So let me first type in table and have my brackets. Let's set the width to 500. Actually, you know what? I don't want the width to be 500 because some tables might need to be wider than others. So let me say that the minimum width should be 500. So min-width colon 500 pixels. And you can guess it if you want to have a limit on how big your table could be. You could type in max-width and then set that to maybe like 900 pixels or something. What else do I want? Do I want to have a border around the table? Yes. I want to type in border colon 1 pixel. We'll make it solid, and we'll make it hashtag 6 zeros for black. I think that's 5. Now let's save it. Okay, I didn't type in border correctly. I was missing a letter. Refresh the page. So one thing that's really interesting about the table is that if you use border for table, it's only going to draw a border around the table. So if you want to have the grid lines throughout your table, you're going to have to code the individual cells to have that. So let me add in another tag for table cells. I'm actually going to let's just kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Let's type in th, comma, td. So if you want to have code that's going to be similar for 2 different selectors, you can put in a comma between selectors' names and have them share the same properties. So let's add border colon 1 pixel solid and black. If you're wondering what TH stands for, that means table header. So if you want the top row for your table to have like maybe bolded text, a specific font size, you can use TH as a way to code that. But I'm going to just leave that as it is. For now, I'm just going to click File, Save, refresh the page, and that added the grid lines for us. What else can we do with tables? I'm going to try some stuff that's going to be a little bit radical that you're probably not going to use very often, but just to show you just how powerful CSS is. So I want to type in tr for table row, and what I want to do is whenever I hover my mouse over different rows in a table, I want that row to change color. So tr colon hover. So I'm using a hover property with CSS. You don't have to limit it to just using this with tables. You can do this for altering your images, altering paragraphs, whatever, just by mousing over it. So I'm going to change the background color to, let's just change it to gold. I'm going to click Save, refresh my page. And as you can see, whenever I hover my mouse over different rows, it changes the color to gold. What else can we do? How about I set every other row to be maybe a silver or a gray color. So tr colon nth dash child. This is actually a new, well, to me this is relatively new. I didn't know this rule existed previously, but it's really cool. So actually, before I put my curly brackets up, I'm going to put this parentheses, and in parentheses I'm going to type in odd. So I want every odd row of my table to be a specific color or to have specific styling choices, or I could type in even. But I'm going to type in odd because I want to start with the first row. Now I'm going to have my curly brackets. I'm going to say background color should be, let's go with gray. So I have CD, CD, CD. That's a gray color. Save it. Refresh my page. As you can see, every other row is gray. And if you're wondering why aren't the rows turning gold? Well, it's due to the way that I have my code stacked on this page. Everything towards the bottom of my style guide is going to have preference over things that are higher up. So let me just move this beneath it. Save it. Refresh the page. And now every row can be gold again. So what was happening is the rows were turning gold every single time, but this gray background color was overriding the appearance of gold. So that's something that you have to be really careful of with CSS, is the way you stack your code on the page. If you ever have the same selector being used twice on your CSS page, whichever one appears lower on the page is going to get preferential treatment. So that's why you didn't see the gold showing up when this was above the gray coloring for every other row. Now, the last thing we want to talk about is, let's take this text at the bottom and let's try to arrange it side by side using CSS code. This is going to be fairly difficult, but it'll be worth doing. So the first thing we want to do is create two unique div tags. We'll call one disclaimer, and we'll call the other one legal. Remember to put a period in front of your tag names. So I'm going to introduce you to a new property right now. This one is called float. And this is going to allow us to move things around on the page, because it's not just like pinned to the page, it's actually just like kind of hovering over the page. So I'm going to make this one float to the left, and I'll make this one float to the right. And then we'll use our margins to push it so it's not just pressed up against the left-hand side of the page, but it's actually maybe hovering towards the middle of the page. But for now, let's just set it. Let's just save this and refresh the page. And it didn't really work because we didn't go to our index page and declare where the div tag begins and ends. So div class equals disclaimer. And I'll have my closing tag here. And I'm going to have another. This one will be legal. And I'll have a closing div tag. Right here. Save it. Refresh. That still didn't work, so I'm missing something somewhere. Okay, I didn't think about it again, but I'm going to type in display :block. And this should work. Refresh the page. That did not work. This isn't the easiest thing in the world to do, so. Refresh. And that worked this time. Let me expand the page. Actually, I realized what was going wrong the first time. I need to set the width to something that's pretty small. Let's try 250 pixels. Now let's set the width here to 250 pixels. I mean, as you can see right now, this paragraph is spanning the entire page, so this isn't floating to the right, so let me see what we're doing wrong. Oh, I don't have a semicolon here. And that worked. If you have any errors in your code, you're just gonna pull your hair out trying to figure out what's wrong. Normally, I would not recommend using just Notepad to do your coding. I have Dreamweaver, but everyone doesn't have Dreamweaver, so I'm just using Notepad because it's a universal tool that's on everybody's computer. I mean, you can download some free software, but that's okay. So if I want to push these in, this paragraph here and this paragraph here, into the middle of the page, let's go back to index. Actually, no, let's go to our style sheet. Let me add a margin. Let's make it maybe, let's just use a percentile. Let's make it 30%. Not a percentile, a percentage. And I'll make the margin left here 30% as well. And we'll just see what it looks like. That's pretty good. So, I mean, this isn't the ideal way to put content side by side. What I would normally recommend is to just use a table. But this is just something you can do. It's just something that's interesting to consider. I just wanted to bold the text for legal. Now, there's one other thing I want to consider. All of my text is running up against the border of my main area, so if I want to push this inward and so it can have a little bit of space, you don't want to use margins to do that. You want to use padding. So let me go to my style sheet. Let me go up to main. Let me add a padding of, well, 10 pixels. Click save. And that gives you a little bit of white space, so your text doesn't just run up to the border. So another thing to consider is whether or not you want your left and your right, and maybe even the top, but you don't want the bottom of this region to have padding. Well, you can type in padding dash left, padding dash top, padding dash right, padding dash bottom, but that's going to take a long time. So another option you have is to just simply type in something like 10, 0, 10, 0. I don't remember if I need to have pixels beneath by each or not. What does this mean? I'll show you what it means. It should be left, top, right, or maybe it's top, right, bottom, left. Yeah, okay, yeah, so I got that wrong. This is 10 pixels on top. This is 0 pixels on the right. When I actually want 0 pixels on top. 10 on the right, 0 on the bottom, 10 on the left. So there you go. That's just another trick that's interesting to use. And I'm going to conclude our lesson here. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about CSS coding, you need to go to w3schools.com. There's so many different tricks you can do with CSS that this is just scratching the surface. But thank you for watching this tutorial.